Chosen one, they didn't expect you to survive, let alone stand strong in the face of everything they sent your way. The ones who were programmed to ignore you, dismiss you, and even discredit you have now found themselves in a position they never thought possible. Somewhere within their ranks, a high-level agent crossed your path, and that encounter began to unravel their carefully constructed programming. Suddenly, they're asking questions they were trained never to ask. They're looking at the world differently because of you. You, who they were told to silence, have instead become the source of a truth so powerful it broke through their conditioning. The world as they know it is crumbling, and it started when they met you. If this message already speaks to your soul, subscribe, like this video, and comment 77 below. The truth is spreading, and it's just the beginning. Stay with us until the end, because we're about to uncover how one moment of awakening can dismantle an entire system. A divine disruption in the system. Sometimes in life, we're placed in positions where our very existence challenges the systems around us. To those in control, we may appear as a problem, an anomaly, something that must be observed, managed, or even silenced. They send their agents with one clear objective: to maintain the order they know and ensure that no ripple disturbs their carefully constructed world. At first, they approach us with cold detachment, their eyes fixed on their mission, their minds on the rules they've been taught to uphold. But then, something extraordinary happens, something that no amount of training or preparation could have predicted. When these individuals step into our presence, it's not our words that shake them, it's our energy. It's not something we can fully explain ourselves. It's just there, an undeniable current of truth that radiates from within. To them, it's like walking into a room and feeling an unexpected draft, the kind that makes them turn their head and wonder where it's coming from. They start to see cracks in the structure they once thought was unbreakable. These aren't physical cracks. They're cracks in their understanding, in their beliefs, in the very foundation of their reality. At first, they might try to brush it off, to convince themselves that what they're feeling is just a momentary lapse, a glitch in their mental framework. But as the moments stretch into minutes, and the minutes into hours, the doubt begins to grow. For many of these agents, their lives have been defined by control. They've been conditioned to see the world in binaries: right or wrong, truth or falsehood, ally or enemy. Encountering a chosen one introduces something entirely different, a force that doesn't fit neatly into their categories. It's not just unsettling, it's transformative. Suddenly, they find themselves questioning not only the mission but their entire purpose. They start to notice things they never noticed before: subtle coincidences, unexplainable synchronicities, and a deeper resonance in the words they overhear. It's as if a veil is slowly lifting, revealing a landscape they never knew existed. At first, the realization can be terrifying. Imagine spending your entire life believing one story, only to find out that it was just a chapter in a much larger narrative. They may feel isolated, even betrayed, by the system that trained them. The truth is no longer something they can ignore. It becomes an insistent presence, whispering to them in quiet moments, challenging them to open their eyes even wider. They begin to see that the mission wasn't about control at all. It was about keeping them in the dark. And as that understanding takes root, they realize they've been granted a choice: continue walking the path of blindness, or step into the light and face the full weight of the truth. For the chosen ones, witnessing this shift can be both empowering and humbling. On one hand, it confirms that the energy they carry is real, that it has the power to awaken even those who were sent to stifle it. On the other hand, it reminds them of the responsibility that comes with such influence. They see how their existence, their light, and their unshakable belief in a higher truth can spark change in even the most unlikely of places. What started as a mission of suppression transforms into a story of awakening, not just for the chosen one, but for the very agent who once sought to suppress them. This transformation is not quick, nor is it easy. It's a slow unraveling of old paradigms, a process of dismantling beliefs that were built over years of conditioning. The agent begins to see the system not as a source of order, but as a structure designed to keep them from understanding their own power. They start to recognize the signs of manipulation, the cracks in the narrative, and the moments when they were nudged away from the truth. In these moments, their frustration often gives way to clarity, and clarity leads to action. No longer content to follow orders blindly, they begin to question, to push back, and to seek out the wisdom they once dismissed. The beauty of this divine disruption is that it doesn't stop with one individual. The ripple effect spreads beyond the agent's personal awakening. Others within the system start to notice changes, subtle at first, then more pronounced. The agent's shift in perspective inspires curiosity, and curiosity leads to more questions. In time, what was once a closed, impenetrable network begins to show signs of opening. The truth that the chosen one carries becomes a catalyst for change, not just for those in their immediate presence, but for an entire structure that once seemed unyielding. Ultimately, this is not a story of defeat, but of transformation. The agent's awakening is not the end of their journey, but the beginning of a new path, one that leads them away from control and toward freedom. As they step into this new reality, they carry with them a profound understanding that light cannot be extinguished, and that once seen, the truth can never be unseen. In their transformation, they become more than just a participant in the system. They become a living testament to the power of awakening and a beacon of hope for those still searching for the light. Comment awake if you've ever seen someone begin to question everything they thought they knew. And if you feel called to go even deeper, there's a sacred space reserved for our community. A private room where you receive full prophetic messages daily. Join the Prop Heron membership through the link in the description and walk this path with us. From skeptic to believer, the inner collapse. It's hard to question everything you once believed, especially when your life was built on a foundation you thought was solid. That's exactly where they found themselves, staring into the growing cracks in their own certainty. At first, they clung to their skepticism like a life raft, dismissing your words as coincidence or clever guesswork. They'd been trained to trust logic, to believe in the solidity of facts, and to dismiss anything that couldn't be measured or cataloged. But there was something in your voice, something in the precision of what you revealed, that left them unnerved. It wasn't just that you seemed to know too much. It was the way your words carried a resonance they couldn't explain. They could feel the truth behind them, even if they didn't want to admit it. And that resonance was what began to wear down their defenses. The more they resisted, the more the doubt grew. It was subtle at first, a faint whisper in the back of their mind that suggested they might be missing something. But as time passed, that whisper became a steady hum, an incessant background noise that refused to be silenced. They found themselves returning to the conversations, replaying your words in their head, trying to find the flaw that would allow them to dismiss it all. Yet no matter how hard they looked, the flaw wasn't there. Instead, they saw patterns emerging, connections they hadn't noticed before. Little by little, their skepticism began to crack under the pressure of those undeniable patterns. One day, they remembered the story of Saul on the road to Damascus, how he had been so certain of his path, so sure of his mission, until a single encounter turned his entire life upside down. They thought about how Saul's rigid belief system shattered when confronted with a truth that was larger than his understanding. And as they reflected on that story, they saw themselves in it. They realized that their own framework was crumbling in much the same way. The truths they had dismissed as impossible were now staring them in the face, impossible to ignore. Each piece of evidence they had once brushed aside was now falling into place, forming a picture they couldn't unsee. It was as if the ground beneath them had shifted, and they were left standing on unfamiliar terrain. This wasn't just an intellectual crisis. It was a deeply personal one. They felt the weight of their training, their years of certainty, their commitment to a system they had believed in completely. To admit that they might have been wrong wasn't just difficult, it was terrifying. But even in that fear, there was something else, a sense of liberation. For the first time, they were beginning to see beyond the walls they had lived within. The very doubts that scared them were also the first signs of freedom. They began to notice other things as well, small coincidences that no longer seemed random, moments of clarity that felt like more than just intuition. They found themselves drawn to certain scriptures they'd long ignored, passages that spoke of transformation and renewal. One verse stood out: "Be transformed by the renewing of your mind." Romans 12 verse 2. They realized that what they were experiencing wasn't just a collapse of old beliefs, but a renewal of their understanding. They weren't losing themselves. They were being reshaped, redefined, awakened to a reality they'd never considered before. This inner collapse was not the end of their journey. It was the beginning. In the midst of their confusion, they felt a quiet certainty taking root. A certainty not in the old structures, but in something higher, something deeper. They began to trust their own instincts, to listen to the still, small voice that had been guiding them all along. The skepticism that had once defined them was now giving way to belief, not blind belief, but a belief grounded in personal experience and undeniable truths. What started as a dismissal had turned into a transformation, a turning point they could never have predicted. Now, as they looked back, they saw their journey differently. It wasn't a fall from grace. It was a fall into grace. They understood that the inner collapse was not a failure, but a necessary breaking apart of the old to make way for the new. And as they stood in this new awareness, they knew one thing for certain: they could never go back. Once you see the truth, once you've felt it deep within, there's no returning to the way things were. They were no longer just a skeptic or an observer. They were someone who had seen the light, and that light was forever changing the way they saw the world. Beneath the surface, hidden agendas and secret networks. When they first stumbled upon the initial clues, it felt like walking into a fog. The structures they had trusted, the institutions they had built their entire worldview around, suddenly seemed different, almost hollow. At first, it was easy to dismiss these subtle signs as nothing more than fringe theories. But over time, the patterns became too intricate, too deliberate to ignore. What appeared at the surface as stable and reliable now seemed riddled with unspoken motives and well-kept secrets. Their old sense of stability turned into a gnawing doubt, and they began to wonder what was really holding everything together. The more they tried to reconcile their previous beliefs with these new discoveries, the more the hidden agendas behind those systems came to light. They started to see that the things they once took at face value were carefully constructed veils, designed to keep deeper truths obscured. As their investigation deepened, the connections they uncovered began to form a chilling tapestry. The codes within ancient texts, the seemingly innocuous symbols embedded in architecture, and the whispered rumors of secret gatherings weren't isolated phenomena. Together, they painted a picture of deliberate concealment. What they had dismissed as poetry or metaphor in scripture began to take on a new dimension. Passages that once seemed purely symbolic now appeared to describe real locations, real events, and real plans that had unfolded in the shadows for centuries. Their doubts shifted from, "Is this possible?" to, "How could I not have seen this before?" It was as if their entire life had been spent staring at the surface of a pond, only now realizing that the depths below were teeming with movement they'd never noticed. Each revelation brought a sense of both clarity and unease. The ancient tunnels they read about weren't just myths. They existed, documented by those who dared to look beneath the surface. The rituals and ceremonies they'd once dismissed as folklore turned out to be practiced by groups operating in the margins, far from public scrutiny. Even the sacred sites they had visited for personal reflection held more than historical significance. They were part of a network intentionally obscured from mainstream understanding. The deeper they dug, the more these elements connected to one another, creating a map of influence that spanned continents and centuries. The feeling was disorienting. Everything they had relied on to define truth was now suspect, and what was once dismissed as far-fetched conspiracy started to feel like a carefully maintained reality. This new awareness didn't come without a price. At times, they felt isolated, as if they were walking a path few could follow. After all, to acknowledge these hidden agendas meant admitting that much of what they had believed in was built on a foundation of misdirection. Friends and colleagues weren't ready or willing to entertain the idea that the world was structured in a way so vastly different from what they'd been taught. And yet, the evidence was clear, hidden not in plain sight, but just beneath it. It wasn't just the symbols carved into walls or the dusty archives of ancient orders. It was the way certain stories were perpetuated while others were silenced, the way certain institutions seemed untouchable while others were dismantled. Slowly, they came to realize that this wasn't about indulging in paranoia. It was about peeling back layers of misinformation to find the truth that had always been there, waiting for someone bold enough to see it. They couldn't ignore the spiritual dimension to it all. These weren't simply political plots or historical anomalies. There was a deeper significance, a battle not just for control of the physical world, but for the minds and souls of those living in it. The hidden networks they discovered didn't just seek power, they sought to shape perception, to mold what people believed about themselves, their place in the universe, and their connection to the divine. For years, these agendas had worked to keep humanity's spiritual potential hidden, replacing it with fear, division, and doubt. Once this pattern became clear, they understood that this wasn't just about unmasking secret organizations. It was about reclaiming the inherent divine power that these forces had tried to suppress. The deeper they ventured into these truths, the more they felt an internal shift. This wasn't just about uncovering hidden knowledge. It was about using that knowledge to transform themselves and the world around them. They began to see how their own journey mirrored what they were discovering. Just as they were peeling back the layers of misinformation in the world, they were also stripping away the false narratives they had believed about their own worth and potential. This awakening became personal. They no longer saw the hidden networks as unbeatable enemies, but as challenges meant to strengthen their resolve. The knowledge they gained wasn't just meant to expose darkness, but to illuminate a path forward, a path where truth, light, and faith would guide their every step. It wasn't just the agents' understanding that unraveled. The very fabric of the system they served started to show signs of strain. As more truths came to light, protocols failed, and once stable chains of command began to break down. It became clear that these hidden networks thrived on secrecy, and as secrecy fell apart, so did their grip. The realization struck that the reason these agendas remained in place for so long was because people had been too afraid to look. But now, that fear was being replaced by curiosity, by courage, and by a relentless desire for truth. The agent understood that their journey was not a solitary one. Others were waking up too. They saw how their newfound awareness inspired others to question, to seek, and to see. What began as a personal unraveling became the first domino in a larger shift, a shift toward collective awakening. In the end, they realized that their discovery wasn't a conclusion. It was a beginning. The hidden agendas, the secret networks, the suppressed knowledge had been exposed, not to cause despair, but to bring about transformation. The more they learned, the more they felt empowered to act. They knew they couldn't erase the past, but they could build a future rooted in truth, a future where light shined into the darkest corners and left no place for deception to hide. By walking this path, they found themselves no longer defined by the structures they had once served, but by the strength and clarity of the truth they now carried. The journey beneath the surface wasn't just about uncovering what had been hidden. It was about finding the courage to step into a higher, brighter reality. You were never alone. Divine protection exposed. When you first set out on this path, it might have felt like you were completely on your own. The trials seemed endless, the opposition relentless. You wondered if you could carry this mission without faltering, without someone at your side to share the burden. But through every step, there were moments, subtle at first, when you realized that you weren't walking alone. It might have been that stranger who offered unexpected words of encouragement just when you were ready to give up. Or perhaps it was the way events seemed to align in your favor, even when everything appeared to be crumbling. These weren't coincidences. They were reminders, whispers of reassurance that someone, or something, was clearing a path before you. Even when doubt clouded your vision, the signs were there, quietly affirming that you were never abandoned. As the challenges grew, so did the evidence of something greater at work. It became harder to explain the close calls, the lucky breaks, and the unforeseen opportunities that kept appearing. You began to notice a pattern. Just when it seemed you might falter, something or someone stepped in. It was more than chance. It was a protective force that ensured you could continue forward. Think back to those moments when you felt the weight of rejection or the sting of betrayal. Somehow, even in your darkest hours, you found the strength to rise again. That resilience wasn't merely your own. It was the result of unseen hands lifting you, guarding you, and urging you onward. Every time someone tried to tear you down, something intervened. Those interventions weren't just lucky breaks. They were orchestrated acts of divine protection. This realization often comes slowly, not in dramatic flashes, but in the gentle unfolding of events. You start to see how certain obstacles were removed before you even knew they existed. You recall times when a chance meeting or a random encounter gave you the wisdom or resource you needed just in time. These were not random occurrences. They were signs that something was walking beside you, guiding you through the storm. When the enemy believed they had cornered you, when it seemed like there was no way out, an unexpected door opened. It was as if the universe itself shifted to ensure that you stayed on course, that you never stopped moving toward your purpose. The evidence was undeniable. You weren't just fighting your battles alone. There was something far greater ensuring that you remained protected. Even those who sought to discredit you couldn't ignore it. They saw it too. They might not have admitted it, but they felt it. Each time they believed they'd silenced your voice or derailed your mission, you returned with even more strength. Each attempt to weaken you only highlighted the extraordinary support you had. They couldn't understand how you always seemed to escape their traps, how you kept gaining momentum despite their best efforts. They started to realize that your journey was not simply one of personal determination. It was a journey under divine protection. And the more they witnessed it, the more they began to doubt their own role in opposing you. What had once seemed like an easy target, a single individual to be managed or dismissed, now appeared untouchable. They came to see that their actions only reinforced what they feared. You were never truly alone. This understanding didn't just impact those around you. It changed you as well. You began to trust the process, to lean into that unseen force rather than fighting against it. Instead of questioning every twist in the road, you started to see each one as part of a larger plan. And with that trust came clarity. You began to recognize the subtle cues, the quiet nudges, and the small miracles that had been guiding you all along. This was not a one-sided journey. It was a partnership between your willingness to keep going and the divine presence that ensured you could. The more you embraced this truth, the more you found peace. The challenges didn't disappear, but they no longer felt insurmountable. You realized that no matter how fierce the opposition, no matter how many doubted your calling, you would never face it alone. In time, this deeper understanding changed the way you approached every aspect of your life. You stopped worrying about whether you were strong enough on your own. Instead, you focused on the faith that something greater was always with you. The setbacks and struggles didn't carry the same weight because you saw them differently now. Each obstacle became a lesson, each delay a preparation. You recognized that those moments of divine intervention were not just random acts of kindness. They were deliberate reminders that you were on the right path. With this newfound certainty, you were able to step forward with more courage, knowing that every step you took was supported. The shield of divine protection was no longer something you hoped for. It was something you knew to be true. Ultimately, this realization didn't just reaffirm your strength. It made you more compassionate, more understanding of others who were still searching for their own signs. You saw how easy it was to feel lost, to believe that you had to face life's struggles alone. But you also knew, deep in your soul, that the same protective presence guiding you was available to anyone willing to listen and trust. This truth fueled your determination. You wanted others to feel the same reassurance, to know that they too were never truly abandoned. The more you shared your journey, the more people began to recognize the hand of divine protection in their own lives. They saw the evidence that had always been there, waiting to be acknowledged. And through your story, through your resilience and trust, they started to believe in their own unseen strength. So here you stand, no longer questioning the source of your survival, no longer doubting the shield that has always been there. Every near miss, every unexpected escape, every unexplainable moment of safety, it all points to one undeniable truth. You have never been alone. And that knowledge changes everything. It strengthens your resolve, it fuels your purpose, and it reminds you why you were chosen. You are not just surviving. You are thriving, guided and protected by a force that will never leave your side. And as you continue forward, you do so with the confidence that no matter what lies ahead, you will never walk that path alone. The domino effect. When one wakes, others follow. When the first mind awakens, the energy of truth does not stop there. The agent's realization, their awakening to the deception they had been living under, sent shockwaves through their environment. Co-workers who had always followed the rules without question began to notice cracks in the system. Perhaps it was a file that had inexplicably gone missing, a directive that no longer made sense, or a colleague who suddenly seemed hesitant to speak the company line. At first, these seemed like isolated incidents, small anomalies in a tightly run operation. But the anomalies multiplied. As one person began questioning the narrative, others around them felt the subtle shift. They couldn't quite explain it, but something had changed. As the days went on, the ripple effect grew stronger. It wasn't just the agent's immediate colleagues. Higher-ups began noticing unusual behavior, files that should have been secure appearing where they shouldn't be, protocols failing when they had always worked before. Orders that once brought immediate compliance now sparked quiet skepticism. It was as though an invisible force had entered the room, peeling away the layers of control and exposing the fragility of their once rigid structure. This wasn't just one person having a change of heart. It was a slow, collective awakening. Each new crack in the foundation revealed more light, and the more light that entered, the less the old system could hold itself together. At the heart of this unraveling was a powerful truth. The agent who had initially encountered your light, your unwavering presence, became the first domino to fall. In that moment of connection, something beyond logic or training had pierced through their defenses. They could no longer see the world through the same lens. Their transformation wasn't isolated. It was the start of a cascade. The light you carried didn't just disrupt their beliefs. It caused them to question everything they had once considered solid ground. They were no longer the loyal enforcer of a system designed to suppress. They were now a seeker, someone looking for answers beyond what they had been told. And this search, this shift in perspective began to spread. As more people within the system began to question, the organization's control began to slip. Procedures that had kept people in line suddenly didn't have the same effect. The subtle undercurrents of change grew into a visible current. Some workers started voicing doubts, asking questions they'd never dared to ask before. Others quietly looked for more information, seeking out documents, recordings, or evidence they once ignored. The entire environment shifted from one of unquestioned compliance to a quiet but growing dissent. It wasn't loud or dramatic at first. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible shift that, over time, gained strength. And at the center of it all was the initial spark of light you brought into their world. The higher the ripple climbed, the harder it became for those at the top to maintain their grip. Orders were still given, but they were no longer met with the same certainty. The underlying cracks in the foundation grew larger until entire sections of their network seemed to falter. It was no longer about one agent's awakening. It was about the collective realization that the structure they had served was built on lies. The chain reaction spread to levels that no one could have predicted. Secret communications, once tightly controlled, began leaking. Rituals that had been performed in shadow started coming into the light. Tunnels of power and secrecy that had once been hidden were now exposed. The entire operation found itself unraveling not because of a frontal attack, but because truth had quietly infiltrated and taken root. For those who once held all the power, it was like watching a carefully constructed illusion dissolve before their eyes. Their protocols failed not because someone stormed in with force, but because the people who carried them out no longer believed. The awakened agent, the one they had sent to monitor and suppress, became the catalyst for something they could never control. One by one, more individuals began seeing the world differently, questioning the purpose behind their roles, and refusing to perpetuate the lie. What started as one isolated moment, one encounter with a chosen one, grew into a wave that swept through every level of their structure. The walls they once thought indestructible were now collapsing from within. Chosen one, you're not just surviving, you're shifting the entire system. What you carry is waking up the very people who were sent to watch you. They're no longer sleeping, and neither is the world. Subscribe if you haven't yet, like this video, and comment I am chosen to let this message anchor in your soul. Share it with someone who needs to hear this. And if you're ready to step fully into the light, join our membership for daily prophetic revelations. Your spiritual path deserves more than fragments. Step into the full light. Keep walking in faith because you were chosen for such a time as this.